Hi, Jonathan. I just have been wanting to respond to the interview that you did about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and you sent me the clip. I think what I'd do is I just kind of scroll through it piecewise and have another listen, and then respond to you with some comments, and hopefully, well, I love what you're saying. I think we are on very much on the same page, but we have different methodologies and perhaps ultimately different goals. So I will be critical. I hope that's taken well. Not least of all because sometimes the really interesting things that somebody has to say are critical. Right? I'm always rather disappointed when all I get is praise. It's nice to have praise, of course, but doesn't advance one's thinking very much. So let's have a little dig in, and I'll make some comments. Okay, a comment about you saying that people don't know today what the impact of their activity on social media is. And there seem to be two distinct things that it would be useful to separate here. One is people's understanding of the impact that their words have. So, they make casual comments, or maybe they think that's something that won't have a big impact, but it does. And the other, which, you say people don't understand their impact. And I think what's hidden behind that is they don't understand the technology. There are no longer, in cybersecurity, we say that the perimeter is dead. The old model of cybersecurity was a very military model in which you have a home base and you have a perimeter around that, and then potentially there are enemies outside of that perimeter. A modern device like a smartphone has no effective perimeter. So people don't understand the technology that they're using. They don't actually understand when we're making a comment that it can be in private, or that it is in private, or that actually that's happening in a public space. So this misunderstanding, ignorance, in fact, around the technology that people use every day is really important, because it denies people's thought processes from having scope. It denies people the ability to make informed decisions about. Well, I might say this here, but I wouldn't say that in a wider context, in a more public place. And I think it's really important that you remember that the technology plays a part in that, and the ignorance of the technology, not just people's perhaps ignorance of the impact of what they have to say. Now, I thought I'd also make a comment about the volatility of people's personas online. And it was interesting when you said, hey, you see some people that seem very accessible, you talk to them all the time, and then maybe they just kind of cut off and disappear. Or maybe you find that people who seem very prominent, and you might imagine that they're quite austere and difficult to talk to, actually have a very, very approachable persona. They almost kind of act as friends immediately. I think in the real world, within real human relationships, we know a lot more about what's going on in people's lives. And one of the things that definitely intervenes in social media relations is this remoteness, that we have no idea of really what's going on for the other. So, maybe they've just had a bereavement, or they've had some shock in their life, or they've come into money. Who knows? It might be good or bad things. You're not going to know that through this very one-dimensional persona that they create. So if they suddenly kind of cut off, we tend to then ascribe all kinds of fantasies to that. Why is that person suddenly blocking me? Why is that person kind of disappeared? You have to kind of remember that a lot of the persona, if as you call it, is actually constructed by the observer. It's the fantasies that we project onto that other person, or what we think is going on for them. So the next point that you made in the interview, Jonathan, was a really cool one, I think, which was about the complete, almost randomness, the disparity of reward that people get back from their activities. Look, this is just the way that the world is in the arts. I could tell you a lot of funny stories about that. You say, hey, sometimes people, they've got no substance at all, but they get very intense rewards from some kind of random post. Other people, they slog their guts out, they work and work and work, and there's a great deal of depth to them. They get, or it's almost inversely proportional. They get no kind of recognition or whatever. I've experienced that many times in arts and entertainments. I worked on an amazing album for a well-known band, and very just slated by the critics, just died a death, nothing. I made one jingle for a radio show once, and it was a complete piece of shit. It was just a random kind of thought, me just messing around on the keyboard time. And this thing got played at got more daytime national radio play than Sting and Madonna. And I got, really rich in a year. And I was young and I'm mad, just money pouring in. And that seems so grotesquely unfair when you think about it, that there is no linear relationship anymore between effort and reward. And I think that is very corrosive to the current generation. Everybody is playing a lottery game. They want to get rich and famous quick. And we don't have a meritocracy anymore. We don't have, you can always hear that in the way Jordan Peterson's talking about people's disillusionment with hierarchical structures and, working up them and so on, because that old model seems to have vanished. And so what you also have in that social media system, which is rewarding people almost randomly, as you know, I'm sure, is like a variable reward schedule, which Skinner discovered was perfect for creating addiction, because you keep wanting to repeat that one random success, and of course you're always competing against yourself. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a good point that should be there at the very core of your as you call it, cyber psychoanalysis. Some people, their internal working model of what it takes for them to be successful is badly damaged. It's really damaged. I'm going to make a remark on something that you then said in your project to the interviewer, that your goals are not to downgrade social media. They are just to raise awareness. And you know what? I heard that from Bailey Farnell. I heard that from Cal Newport. Everywhere I see people making commentary now on the problems of social media, they're offering that up right at the beginning as an apologetic. And if you read my writing in Digital Vegan, you'll see that I tackle that head on. Social media is a problem, right? And I don't think you need to be that cautious. I don't think you need to hide any longer the idea that, hey, I'm not challenged, I'm not trying to downgrade social media. Now, I most definitely am, just for the record. I think it's a pernicious and terrible thing in society at the moment. And it's one of the first things I like to clear up. I like people say, well, are you against social media? As if that was kind of weird. It's like, oh yes, I most definitely am against social media. Where that conversation goes from then, that's a different matter, but let's kind of put the cards on the table right from the start. I don't think you should be ashamed to say that. I'm assuming, of course, that you actually share that viewpoint. The guy interviewing you, I didn't catch his name, I'm sorry, but he kind of makes a cool point when talking about, hey, this has only happened in the last 10 years. That's really significant, because 10 years is literally nothing in human history. Not just on a kind of geological or evolutionary timescale, but even in a kind of time of relatively fast social change, 10 years is not much. It took 10 years for the effects of the Soviet Union falling apart to kind of filter through to Europe and Russia. So that's profoundly quick. And, maybe you could say, well, that's part of a kind of convergence or singularity type thinking. Social change accelerates. But whatever you think about that, I think it's important to realise that human beings don't process social change that quickly. So I have first-hand experience at my age of, I spoke to people in my village when I grew up who had been in not one but two world wars. They're very old people then, but I heard first-hand accounts of the First World War and the Second World War, which wasn't that distant in history to them. And they were still processing it 20, 30, 40 years later. The effects of rapid societal change have to be integrated, not just in an individual, but interpersonally and in groups. And this can take a really, really long time. So we consider basically the effects of social media as a trauma, and the effects of rapid technological change as a trauma. It's stuff that society hasn't yet managed to deal with. Obviously there are other events, and you can see very similar behaviours and attitudes. For example, the Kennedy assassination or 9/11, things like that. They create a psychic wound which is shared by everybody. But then it's the time factor. Even 5 years after it's happened, 10 years after it's happened, people are actually still waking up to it and going, "Oh my goodness, this really bad thing happens. No, we need to talk about it." So I would say there's grief going on. There's this all the kind of classic processes that happen post trauma. It would be a really useful lens to look at social media through that, because some of the worst things that happened in social media are still only like 3 or 4 years old, but they're really recent in living memory, and people just haven't even had time to talk about them yet. Kind of about a quarter of the way into the interview, you share some, I think, very personal ideas and stories about your own struggles, negative effects of social media on you. At the same time, you're kind of defending social media as in a very morally relative way, saying, well, hey, it can be a really great thing for some people. The times in my life where I've heard that duality, where I've heard that same tone around something, it is absolutely with drugs. And what I can bring to this conversation is I know plenty, I have a lot of experience with addicts, social effects, with people, death, people dying from overdoses, lives ruined and so on. But in all that time, I would hear that same thing, that kind of ambivalence towards something, which, wow, it's so great. Oh, I had an amazing pill this weekend. We went out to this party. I did this, I did that. Wasn't it amazing? It was brilliant. Here comes the down. So and so is in hospital. They've got psychosis. So and so is really, really poorly. I really have come to the opinion, and let's be clear, what we're talking about when you say social media, you're talking about big tech, massive public, Facebook, Twitter, all of this kind of stuff, right? That to me is the difference. If you want to compare that and use the drug analogy and compare that to good kinds of social media, which you might call, like, say, moderate alcohol use, or smoking some weed or something. The large commercial social media are crack, cocaine, and heroin compared to a bit of recreational old-style drug abuse. You're going to fuck yourself up with that stuff sooner or later, I think, is the way that you need to kind of see this. And there's a slippery slope there between, hanging around anonymously in an IRC channel, maybe having a pseudonym that you kind of log into, Stack Exchange, and you use the internet in a socially interactive way to solve problems, to share ideas. And this obsessive compulsive echo chamber of having a real world identity online that a digital version that you use as your mouthpiece. And it's so psychologically destructive. I hear the language in what you're saying of addicts, of drug users. I don't think that concrete and useful analogies have been made yet, but actually that big tech social media has the same issues as tobacco and drugs, alcohol, firearms, maybe. And so you could say, well, I'm hinting that it should be regulated. Yeah, damn right. I definitely think it should be. But there's something more to it than that, in people's awareness of it as a potentially dangerous product, and something that you would generally steer children away from. I would hope any parents now, knowing all the wealth of scientific information that's out there now about teen suicides and depression and bullying and so on, that they would discourage their kids from using social media the same way that they would discourage their kids from getting into drugs. And that might be hypocritical. And that's very hard. In every generation, you always find this problematic hypocrisy, is that parents don't want to tell their kids, hey, don't do that because I did that. Fuck me up. So why do you have a problem telling your kids don't do that? But yeah, I really do think there's a lot to be made of that, I think, very strong analogy between social media and hard drugs. I want to speak to this comment that you made about us, and you're painting with a broad brush there, us widely accepting this because it's become part of our culture. I disagree. I don't think it is really. I think it's possibly quite transient, and I think that there's a very vocal, in fact, still a minority. If you look at social media use, it's still a minority thing, right? Just on a global scale, right? Half of the world's population are not on social media or don't use it. So this idea, this sort of folksy, hey, we all do it, don't we? No. And what's important here is this concept of normalization. It's not that everybody does it, it's that everybody thinks that everybody does it. And that's different, and in some ways more pernicious. It's like people who were famous in the 80s. They weren't famous for something, they became famous for being famous. You see what I'm saying? So social media isn't this thing that it's made out to be. It's that the mythology around it is bigger than it really is. So what that normativity creates is a lack of defensive language, is a lack of defensive posture. There's somebody I think you might quite like. His name is Henry Giroux. He's an artist and an educator. Definitely check out Giroux, Giroux, I think. It's a French name, but he's a New Yorker and a very interesting philosopher. One of the talks he does is titled "Where's the Outrage?" And what it's about is the lack of defensive language, the lack of awareness, the lack of outrage, the lack of pushback from a youth generation who have been trodden underfoot, who've been what he calls a disposable generation. You know, it's that the neoliberal capitalism's created a disposable generation. And now, whether or not you subscribe to his politics, that concept of a group of people, a very large group of people, perhaps an entire culture, as you say, that has not developed its natural conceptual defenses to something because it's been told constantly messaged, propaganda, constantly this message is hammered home. Hey, well, everybody does that. Everybody does it. It's like that's how it happens with drugs at school, isn't it? Well, hey man, everyone smokes weed, right? You don't want to be that guy who doesn't smoke weed. Everybody's smoking some weed, right? No. When you actually do the science and you look around, it's just those 5 or 6 kids who are puffing away, and they want everyone else to be in their gang. So they're very vocal. And they are very prominent because everybody's interested in them, right? Because they're pushing. So this is how it happens with big tech. Its actual impact is much smaller than the big scary shadow that it creates. But that becomes the reality, right? I just noticed that 14 minutes in, Jonathan, you actually said, "Hey, social media it's not like a drug." Oh, yes, it is. It's a drug. Yeah, I mean, you're coming off the back of this comment about terms and conditions and end user license agreements. It's the stuff that you never read. I've got to say, the tone of you guys when you're talking at that point sounds to me a lot like learned helplessness. If you listen carefully to what you're saying, you're adding apologetic to a situation which is kind of excusing criminality. I'll put it this way, you're openly talking about non-legal behaviour, you're in tort law. So, a contract has no effect if you don't read the terms and conditions, because it's not a contract, because you can't have agreed to the substance of the contract, right? And everybody knows this, that none of these contractual conditions stand up. The legal system has been completely broken for a decade on this now. One of the ways that they've kind of gone around it is they've always settled. So whenever people have challenged, what it comes down to is this concept of capability. Are you capable of entering into a contract? So a minor is not able to enter into a contract. They don't understand the significance and the meaning and the consequences of what it would be to be in a contract. If you think about it, the average person, IQ 100, regular job, regular kind of dude, right, hasn't the first clue of anything that is said in a technical document like terms and conditions. They don't have the cognitive capability to be party to that contract. Now nobody's really seriously brought this up in law, in politics. They should, because that's the long and short of it, right? Facebook say, hey, there's nobody under, 16 years old, 14 years old, or whatever they've said. Well, look, in many jurisdictions anyway, a minor, you don't reach the age of majority until you're like 18 or something. It's when you can, what is it in the States? It's like 21 before you can drink alcohol, yeah. So, yeah, you have to be 21 to be able to take responsibility for that kind of thing, for the consequences of getting drunk, or maybe driving a car or owning a firearm or whatever. You've then got the assumption that kind of 14-year-olds could read through 90 pages of legalese and understand the consequences of their actions of signing up to Facebook. Obviously, they could not, right? This is just not even debatable. So, this to me is one of the attack vectors. It's one of the necessary ways to take down social media, because it is creating real palpable harms in society, because it's feeding on, it's exploiting people's lack of understanding about the consequences of what they're getting into. I love the way about 17 minutes you say the word convenience. Convenience, convenience is a dirty and disgusting word. And in Digital Vegan, I've pointed out actually that in Brit language, convenience is something that you take a piss in. You know, it's convenience means like something that you shit on, something deserving of the least possible amount of respect. Well, to celebrate and to lionize, to hold up convenience as some kind of good, I think that's become deeply problematic in this day and age. I think that's really big, deep part of the problem, actually. You can look at that human disposition through different language, right? You can talk about laziness, greed, sloth, and so on. They're invitations to all of those things. In every sense in which you get convenience, you lose something, you give up something, right? But I think perhaps I'm being a bit racist to say American, because I think European too, but certainly in Western language at present, we treat convenience as an unqualified good. And it absolutely isn't. Whenever I hear the word convenient, all my alarm bells go off. I'm just kind of thinking, well, what am I losing here, right? What's the shtick? What's the fiddle? Yeah. You asked a question, Jonathan, about influencers. They're a new thing. Hey, we've only just got influencers. We never had influencers in the past. No, they've always been there. Of course, they were called something else. And no, it's not celebrities. Now, an influential person would have inhabited a much more structured part of society, you know, in the political system, maybe a politician or a TV personality. That's not quite a celebrity, you know, that's somebody who's a familiar, authoritative voice. And they may gain authority by actually being an expert. So, you know, lots of influencers, influential people would be educators, right? On TV, on children's TV, like say Johnny Ball, who was just a kind of crazy, he talks about maths and physics and stuff all the time. And, you know, it was like a TV personality that people paid attention to, right? You know, he could go on TV and say, talk about science like now with the vaccines, or, and his voice would carry gravitas and weight because he's known to be an intelligent thinking person, right? What's happened is the nature of influence has changed to this, well, I don't even know what it is. It's just this vacuous, narcissistic corporate thing. But anyway, influencers have always been there. They simply transformed. So we kind of really get to the money shot at around about 18 minutes in that interview. And, you know, he asks you, so do you think we should all just unplug from social media? And your response is no. I kind of discourage people from doing that. I think you should kind of wean yourself off because, you know, everything's becoming online. I tell people, you know, get the fuck off social media as quickly as you can. And I specifically mean Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that kind of big tech stuff. And like you, I kind of encourage people to educate themselves, to learn about it, to understand what's really going on in the online space. But a language that perhaps you're missing that I find is very empowering is I talk a lot about taking back tech. I say, you know, you need to own it. You need to take it back. You can't do that from within the system itself. You can't correct Facebook from inside Facebook. You can't work within that system. So you have to exit it, right? I mean, getting out of it is the first thing. Then it's about understanding, you know, what it obviously, as you do understand and you communicate very well, it's about figuring out what it is you want from digital communication. And what tools are out there that can help you do that? How do you build much smaller, more local, more intimate social networks online using, you know, federated and distributed tools and all the good new stuff that's coming now, right? You know, all of the pushback and alternatives to centralized social media, these sort of rhizomic, interoperable, standards-based, fully encrypted systems, which they're not just bringing privacy, but they're bringing dignity and they're bringing control to all of the things that are missing with big tech social media. So I always think it's important to throw people a bone of hope is that, you know, you can carry on with a digital life, but just there are better digital lives. And I would always say, if you're searching with Google, that you're dining at the McDonald's of information. You know, if you're on Facebook, that's not the kind of party you want to be at. You know, that's a party on a soiled mattress in the basement somewhere with dirty needles. You don't want to be in that alleyway, right? There's more going on in the digital world that you could really enjoy. I love this thing that you said at 19 minutes on the interview, which was about authenticity. How if you're faking it and constructing some phony persona, people are going to bust you, and they're going to go and check it out and figure that you don't add up. Yeah, well, hey, I've got to say this: I never, ever, ever, I don't think ever in my life, seriously, have gone and researched somebody, doxed them, checked them out, gone through that. I mean, partly because I'm not on social media, so I don't really have that capability. But I just think, I know for a start that whatever I see online is going to be a presented, a manicured version of the real person. So I'm not going to be able to really take that seriously anyway. I actually like to surprise myself. I love meeting people for the first time, even though I've had maybe a significant online relationship with them through email or something for a long time, never having really dug into that person's life. Because that's what life is. It's that enjoyment of discovery of a relationship is something that's dynamic and it's developing, and you kind of you bounce things off somebody and you get to discover, hey, they don't think like you thought they did, or whatever. That's beautiful. That's a lovely feeling. It's so weird when you meet people these days and they think that you must know everything about them, and I find actually that ignorance, I treat that ignorance as a strength and a virtue, because when it turns out that I'm not prejudiced against them in the ways that they think that I am, they're really warm and like, hey, well, I thought you would think this of me. It's like, well, why would I think that? Because I don't know anything. All I know is what you've told, is the relationship that we've constructed face to face. So this is kind of weird to explain, that the ignorance becomes a strength, right? Because that is the most genuine way that you can approach somebody, which is to take them on face value in the moment. Now, anything you know historically, anything you think you know historically about another person is suspect at the very least, right? Because, hey, people change. If there's one thing that defines life, it's that stuff changes, and people do very much as well. Oh, wow. And now I've just heard the interviewer saying to you, who would want to work with somebody that they couldn't find on social media? Oh my goodness. Well, this has got to be a generational thing, yeah? I have no LinkedIn profile, Facebook, any of it. I hate it all. And I was very, precocious, very early on in the 90s, I think. I realized what was going on. Being, as a computer scientist, as a kind of hacker, somebody who thinks about these things, I could see where this whole trajectory was going, and I just never got involved in any of it. Well, I can tell you now, I have to fend off job offers with a shitty stick. I am often being approached, headhunted, asked to work on things. I have to turn down so much because I want to focus on the things that are important to me. So I think this is a pernicious myth. I'm disappointed to hear the interviewer saying something like that and repeating this tired mythology of, well, who would want to know you, or what? I can tell you from first-hand experience that is simply not the case. That is simply not how life works. And if you actually dig into the numbers, right, if you do some proper research, I had to do a careers unit, a module for my students when I was teaching in arts and entertainment. And it was stuff about the film and the music business. And I was trying to communicate to people how the gig economy really works, how you get work as a freelancer, how you get into an industry. It's about who you know in reality. It's about a lot of it is nepotism. A lot of it is random serendipity and opportunity of meeting someone at a party. And the truth is that nobody gets jobs because of someone they met on Facebook. Nobody gets a job because of LinkedIn. Not the kind of career-changing opportunity, not the thing that most people are after. That comes from real life. And I'm convinced that a mythology has arisen about a constructed, a contrived idea of necessity of online presence. Well, obviously that's driven by the people who run these giant corporate platforms, right? They've got a lot of money to create that mythology of if you're not on social media, like you don't exist. Codswallop. What a lot of bullshit, right? It's simply one it's one modality of existence. And depending on your ability to work in other spheres, depending on your ability to be a real person, as it were, to make face-to-face social contact, to be proactive in getting out and about and looking for work and stuff, you know, it has more or less importance. And to the extent that you cultivate one area of life, another one is less important. So I would strongly refute that remark, I think. So the topic comes up about GDPR, and you kind of have to field this question about, well, how would you feel if the American government brought out this? And I have to say, there's a lot of muddiness and confusion going on in some of the discussion there. I think you're conflating different laws and different concepts, perhaps. Data protection versus identity versus pseudonymity, and so on. And the question is, what would happen if you had to use your passport to open a Twitter account? And you kind of said, wow, man, that would be an outrage. That would be terrible. That would never happen in America. And in that little exchange, I think you all missed the opportunity, or you didn't want to go there to actually unpack more deeply. Now, what's the issue here around real identity and social media? And how does that help? Is there this kind of unspoken assumption there that somehow having a real identity tied to a social media account would be helpful or useful to any of the problems which we are experiencing with social media? I don't think it does. I think on the whole, it's part of the problem. It actually makes lots of these things much worse. And in one of the chapters of Digital Vegan, I talk about teen suicides and how these simply didn't happen in my generation, even though we were using intensely digital communications as part of our lives, in a pre-corporate social media era. And the reason was, of course, everybody had pseudonymity. If you kind of got into trouble, as it were, if you got into a spat with somebody and you were getting unwelcome attention, you just burn that identity. Most people had 5 or 6 different avatars. They use them on different forums. You could drop one day and reinvent yourself the next, and it just didn't matter because that's how people experimented. And now, I think one of the big problems with social media is the relation of real identity to online presence. That certainly should not exist for young people. You don't know who you are when you're 12, 13, 14 years old. You experiment with all kinds of different outlooks on life, and it's completely unreasonable to suppose that those should be tied to your identity, and certainly permanently tied to your identity by the horrendous data retention and mass surveillance that goes on now. It's a crippling and corrosive environment for young people to be in those conditions. So I think what happens in an interview like that is you exchange platitudes and you allow certain assumptions to kind of just flow past. And the real trick in challenging people's thought, getting them to think more deeply about the problems of social media and so on, is to then explicitly ask that question, to unpack it and say, well, why is that a problem? Or what do you mean, about that? What's the issue that you're trying to play with here? And just kind of do what you call root cause analysis. 5 whys. You just ask, but why is that? Why would that be significant? Who would it be significant to? What would cause that? And so on. Just keep on with the whys until you get to something which is fundamental and interesting. So this is a bit of a difficult one to talk about because I think it's a bit of an American thing. You're talking about problem-oriented thinking versus solution-oriented thinking. It's very nice to kind of think, hey, wouldn't it be great if people offered solutions instead of merely complaining about problems? And while that's a positive way to think about life, I think it hides an unreasonable and unfair expectation that's very easy to put upon people in a way that seems like an argument, but it's not an argument. So let me put it like this: somebody who makes an objection to a behaviour or a circumstance or whatever is not obliged in any way to offer an alternative. So you often hear this, and I hear this a lot from Americans. It's like, well, hey, you're dissing this, but what's the alternative? You tell me, what should we do? And it is in no way incumbent upon somebody raising an objection that they have to offer you an alternative, right? So here's an example. It's like there's some guy like beats his wife or something. And you say, it's really, really bad. You shouldn't be, domestic violence is awful. You shouldn't, you shouldn't hit people. And the guy says, hey, well, you tell me not to hit my wife. What's the alternative, right? Well, there isn't one. Just don't do that, right? Just don't do that. When you're talking about a bad behavior and you criticize somebody's bad behavior, obviously it immediately evokes an emotional response. With the person feels very judged. They're antagonistic towards you, and that response of then saying, "Well, hey, buddy, but what should I do instead?" is an unreasonable request. Okay, so to say to people, well, look, all you do is complain about the bad sides of social media, but what we want to offer is solutions. I think that's a nice thought, but hey, maybe it's not your job to offer solutions, right? Maybe it's simply your job to help people make that transition away from a bad behavior. So, right, let's bring it to a bit of a conclusion, because this is where it gets really good at the end, and I think your points are really positive when you're kind of trying to reduce it down to sort of 3 or 4 behaviors. Don't let yourself be dictated to by the demands of social media. Don't allow that to shape, to make you be something inauthentic that you're not. Be very careful what you take in. You need to have filters. Now, I think that one resonates very well with the digital veganism idea of to treat social media like food. You can have a toxic diet, or you can eat really well and kind of respect your body and respect your mind in terms of the information that you take in. That's an analogy that works great. I think it's the one you said first, actually, was be careful not to lose your identity. I think that's kind of very similar to the third one as well. Don't lose sight of yourself. But having said that, then I think you have to add to that, well, look, inevitably, if you stay on social media, all of those bad things are going to happen to you, unless you are an extraordinarily strong person. An average person is eventually, it's going to get to them. And, it's intrinsically toxic. And therefore, your real long-term goal, or not even that, your quite urgent goal really, is to disengage, is to get off of social media, and to then rethink yourself, your goals in life, your needs, your need for contact and intimacy, and to be heard, the kinds of things you want to listen to, the kind of what you're seeking, in an offline context, in a slow time, in a measured and minimalistic way, in a reflective way. And then you can be technologically mindful. You can then go, okay, well, now what tools do I really need to do this? And of course, most people then, that's another experience altogether. Where are you going to start to find out about the niche communities that are out there, the very many tools, fascinating and interesting new digital tools that are evolving, that allow completely different reconfigurations of social graphs, of modes of discourse, of identity, which are just not present in commercial social media, because obviously they don't serve the interests of profit. But once you get out into the sort of Fediverse, into the free open source software, the very interesting, innovative products that are being made by hackers, and you figure out that I can reach people much more healthy for my soul, in a much more healthy way for society by using those tools. But that has to be driven by a kind of informed desire. And people who've fallen into the social media trap and then got completely lost in that jungle, I think it's like you've got to get them out and get them through detox first, before they can then be Epicurean and make more educated choices about how to engage with digital communication technology. Well, so there you have it, mate. I really enjoyed listening to your conversation. I'm so sorry that I didn't get back to you much quicker. I just, life's been crazy here. So, you sent me the clip, and I listened to it kind of like the same night, actually, and I was like full of enthusiasm. Oh yeah, I'm going to do an audio response or a type response for Jonathan. And then, it's just slipped. It's just gone. It's almost a month now, I think, since you did it. So, looking forward to the next time that we can interact, and keep up the jolly good work, and best of luck to you.